Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. It's just me today, so you get to just listen to my voice. So this one's probably going to be a little bit shorter due to going solo on this one. So one of the things I want to talk about today, and actually, you know what? Before we get into that, let me just do my quick little housekeeping stuff. Real quick, make sure that you guys go out and follow the Man with Green Eyes. Check him out. Again, he's a great long-term sponsor of the show. Same thing with Boogeyman Actual. Sorry, I was yawning there. I've had a long day. Go check them out. I'll put the links in the description. Make sure you check them out. Check out Tap Rack Tyler. Some of the guys that support us, or I like to support them. So, moving forward. Some of you guys that have listened to the show know I've found a group of dudes that I go shooting with fairly regularly up here in North Idaho. And we usually go shooting at a local range, or whenever we want to do stuff that's maybe a little bit more dynamic, or we want to do more like small unit tactics type training, we'll go up to a very wooded area in North Idaho, kind of off the beaten path out in the woods, haul our stuff up there and kind of set up, do some training, do some patrols, things like this. So we all know, like with summertime, it doesn't get dark till real late, but it's starting to get darker earlier as time goes on and the year goes by. So this last time we were up there, I was thinking about this, and it was just really interesting. I know I've been a big criticizer of the people who are like, without nods, you're not an asset. And I still think that is kind of a BS way of looking at things. But what I will say, going up there, this is an extremely wooded area. Very heavy brush, very heavy canopy. When it hit about 9 o'clock, it got dark enough to the point where there was a guy within arm's reach distance of me, actually two of them, and it was so dark that with all our headlamps off and all our lights off, I couldn't see the guy. And it got me thinking about how terrifying night fighting would be in that instance. To where if the only thing I have is my white light. So if I go off, man, I'm sorry I'm yawning so much. If I hit off my white light, then I immediately give away my position. Everyone knows where I'm at, but I get a chance to potentially see what I'm looking at. It just really drove home the importance of how much of a superpower like night vision really can be in an environment like that. Because those guys who were with us who did have night vision, were able to clearly see in that environment, even though it was, really hard for the rest of us. But it got me to thinking, like, from a historical standpoint, it really drove home the fact as to why people without nods for the longest time, what you fought during the daylight hours, and at night, you hunkered down from a defensible position and you held the line. And you didn't move. You didn't go advance. You didn't try to do whatever. You just stayed and you in one spot, and you defended that area. And it really became apparent because it was so dark out there. We just couldn't see much of anything, And I was thinking about this, when we were out there, and some of the guys with nods were walking out doing the shoot and move course we had set up. And so they're, running nods, they're running nods so we can't see them with our normal eyes, just like depending on where they, trying to figure out where they are on the trail that we'd set up in the shoot and move course, outside of the occasional muzzle flash, and just thinking back to some of the stories I've heard from Vietnam and from World War II about troops either in foxholes or defensive positions, dead at night, jungle areas, overseas, and not being able to see anything. And then someone thinks they hear something, one round gets popped off, and the next thing you know, the whole jungle lights up. And it was just crazy to think about, like, that's how fighting, at night has been for a long time, is that everyone just hunkers down and defends. So it really drove home to me the importance of night vision, and the importance of thermal especially as well in that kind of environment, and how important those things can be. But also how if you don't have those, because that's the thing, unfortunately, I don't. How do I go about mitigating that? And the thing I just kept thinking about was that for those who don't have night vision or thermal, if things were to kick off tomorrow and you don't have those, or no one in your group has those, you have to find a way to navigate around that deficiency. And one of the things I think is and kind of important with that is learning how to set up quick defensible areas, maybe even potentially having like pin flares or some kind of flare for illumination. Obviously still having white light, but learning like the art of defensive networks and the art of, trench building and defensive fortifications. Because I think realistically, most of us, that's what something like that would look like. And it really made me think back to the Sean Ryan show I'd been listening to, that for those who aren't aware, Vigilance Elite, the Sean Ryan show. He's a former Navy SEAL who went to the CIA for a while, and now he does kind of a Joe Rogan style podcast, but with my opinion, a lot cooler people and a lot cooler format, very long form interviews. And he had interviewed one of the last surviving flamethrower operators from Iwo Jima, and it just being out there in the woods reminded me so much of what he was saying, where he was talking about how dark it would be on that island, and that they'd be in foxholes, 6 feet apart from each other, not be able to see each other, just pitch black. And the Japanese would try to sneak up on their positions and launch bonsai attacks. And he said, you'd see nothing out there. You'd hear them. You'd hear something moving. You wouldn't sure what it was. Then one guy would be convinced something was out there, pop a round off downrange. The next thing you hear out of the darkness is just bonsai, like super loud everywhere across the way. And just, hundreds of Japanese soldiers running at you. He said it was like a horror movie, to where all you can see is, you can only see them in the muzzle flashes. And thinking about like how terrifying of an aspect that actually comes down to for fighting at night, and how much of an advantage night vision is. So I don't want to say that night vision is the end all do all, and don't sacrifice other things to get it necessarily, like as far as essential preps like food, water, medical, things like that. But it's definitely something that you need to start working towards if you don't have it already. It's something I'm taking seriously to get to. It just became super apparent like how obvious it really was to be like, wow, this is crazy. Another thing with that too is like, if you don't train at nighttime, if you don't do a lot of your training at night, you really need to start doing that. Depending on how your time constraints are and stuff. I understand we all have lives, we all have work, things like this, but especially as it starts getting into the fall, it's a lot easier to do because it gets dark. At like 4, you need to train at night. You need to learn how to train with a light, how to train with your white light, how to train with nods and thermals if you have them. And if you don't, you need to learn how to move around and operate at nighttime. You need to know, like, hey, can I still find all my gear on my kit at night? Like, learning how to fight at night, if you had to, is a pretty good skill, I would say, to learn. And I think that's a really good thing that we're picking up as we're doing this, is learning how to walk through pitch black woods at night when you can barely see, without throwing on your light. How to make sure you're appropriately using red lights at night instead of white, so you don't throw off. So you can still kind of keep whatever natural night vision you've developed, but also not throw away your position. So there's been a few things with that, trying to pick up on some skill sets and how to make them a little bit better. I think that's been really cool to learn from doing stuff at night, but also just, again, when you really deep down think about it, like fighting at night, as someone without night vision, is definitely not ideal. And you definitely get the idea that, I think in my eyes, a grid down, shtf type scenario, realistically, even for those of us who may have nods, is more than likely going to be do something during the daytime, come back like the cowboy movies, come back to the fort at night, hold out, wait for relief, right? Maybe have a small select few with night vision, go out and do some scary stuff in the woods. Everybody else, though, if there's nods, will probably be passed around from post to post to maintain a night watch. And, basically stay where the fires are lit, stay in your defensive positions, and let the enemy come to you at night and, defend yourself. Moving on a little bit from there, though, as we go into I know night vision is always one of those touchy subjects where, half the people are gung-ho about it, half the people are FU about it, and, everyone's got an opinion because of how much money it costs. And there is a big barrier to entry. I think it's getting a little bit better, but it's obviously, it's a big ask, For a lot of people, just getting that one quality rifle kitted out is a big financial burden. Then to ask them to turn around and spend 2 or 3 times that on night vision, it can be a lot to ask. So that's why the other thing too is, I try to stay away from the whole, like, if you don't have this piece of gear, you're not an asset type of ideology, because everyone's needs are different and everyone's finances are different. And I'm not going to tell someone just because they don't have a $5,000 piece of equipment that they're not capable. But moving forward from that, so T-Rex Arms recently put out a post that I thought was kind of interesting. We was talking about CQB specifically. And he did a poll, and it was something like, how many of you would access like the free, like if there was CQB manuals and CQB training, like how many of you would access it for free and do it? And it was like, mostly everybody. It's like, how many of you would devote, the time and effort to go do a 2 to 3 day course? And it was most people. And I was like, how many of you would go to an 8-week course that was $7,500? And it was like, nobody. No one's got the time or the money. And the point he was trying to make was like, even if you had access to the materials, even if you had all this stuff, like you tell everybody that he basically says, he was saying, all these influencers, they're not gatekeeping you. They're not trying to keep information from you. It's just like, even if you had all the information, there's no way you could really compete because they're going to 8-week schools, getting paid the whole time, learning how to do CQB, and you're watching 4 YouTube videos and clearing your basement. That's not comparable. And I get the point that he's trying to make, right? About he's saying, like you shouldn't like to not demand all this stuff for free and all this information for free from people, because he's saying, like, are you even going to do anything about it anyway? Are you going to use it? And I get the point that he's trying to make, but he makes the comment in there that, you can't compete with these military members and law enforcement agencies, SWAT teams that are going to these multiple weeks long schools and things like this. And he used his personal experience of saying, he went to a 64-hour course for Tennessee firefighting, and that, he felt like he was drinking water out of the fire hose, proverbially. And that is just so much information that you feel like you almost feel like less than when you showed up there because of how much information it was, if you get what I'm saying, it's almost like an overburden of information. And I understand his point. However, I think that the idea, the problem that I have with that is this idea that, like, well, you're never going to be able to compete with the professionals. And that's one thing, we've talked about multiple times at length on this podcast. It's kind of the whole reason that we started it. I get the idea that to do something that well, there's a lot that goes into CQB, and just using CQB as just a single example, there's a lot that goes into it. I've done it myself. I've done training courses myself. I've done all kinds of schools myself on it. I would say a lot of it is tabletop. A lot of it was, theories and like, this is how we do it on paper, crawl, walk, run. And then it's like, okay, cool, we're going to walk through it. Now we're going to crawl through it. Now we're going to run through it. Now we're going to introduce medical scenarios into it. Now we're going to introduce sim rounds. And it elevates in time, and it has the luxury of being able to walk you through things. However, I think the idea of just saying like, oh, well, you don't possibly have 2 months to dedicate to this. There's no way you could get better, or there's no way that you could reach the same level of expertise if you just downloaded the information and practice it with your buddies at the range or in the woods or in your house. And I got to disagree there. And that's just from personal experience. Now, he makes the argument where you won't be able to compete against, special forces, special operations, special forces, or SWAT teams. And with that, I would say, like, okay, I can definitely see the argument there. That, if you're not able to compete with tier 1 operating units, whether it be law enforcement or military, because you don't have the time, ammo, or money commitment to be able to put to that. And I know he's kind of talking like in the context of if you had to fight government forces, for some reason. Whatever scenario has come down and wars on American soil and you have to fight government forces. However, most of you who have served that are listening, as well as those of us who, me and Mike who talk about this stuff all the time, know that a majority of the military is not combat arms. It's like less than 10% or something right around there. On top of that, even within combat arms, most service members do not train consistently every single day. In this sense, like you might go to a schoolhouse and learn a skill set. Like, for example, like with the CQB thing, right? Yes, the Army has an 8-week CQB course, but you're not doing it all the time. Like the Navy, for example, I'll use that. It's one I'm more familiar with. So we have a thing called Security Reaction Force Bravo. Sorry, SOF Bravo, SRF Alpha. And I always get the two confused, but one's a more basic and one's a more advanced. And it's a several-week course where you go through and you learn how to clear rooms and, TCCC is tactical combat casualty care and how to apply it. And there's scenarios where you go to a kill house and it's like an active shooter scenario. You got to get in and stop the gunmen, and they got people in moulage. So they look like they're bleeding and they're screaming, and you got to figure out like how to prioritize work. Do you stop and help the guy that's bleeding, or do you go out towards the sounds of gunfire? What do you do? And the thing for me is like, it's a great course and you learn a lot out of it, but it's a one-time gig. It's a check in the box. You're qualified. You've done this. Great. But you might never see those skills again. Like in an academic setting like that, you might never go to another schoolhouse. I mean, I went to these schools within the first 4 years of active duty. The next 7 years after, never did any refreshers, anything like that. Like we've done certain drills or certain things like that in training, but it's more or less like ad hoc thrown together. It was never like, hey, here's a schoolhouse that we're going to send you to. Now you're going to do this every day for 11 years. And that's the way it is with a majority of the military, is that you can go learn these really cool skill sets like CQB or all kinds of stuff, right? But it's a temporary thing. You're in an educational status for a short term and then turned loose back to your job because you have other things to do. You can't, and that's the thing is like, even like live fire stuff, even going out and just shooting times on rifles, there's an ammo requirement that comes into that. And that getting ammo to go shoot can sometimes, depending on the unit you're in, it could be a pain in the butt, like logistically to figure it all out. So then on top of that, you figure you've got all the other units that need to use the facility that you're going to go use, because it's not like you're just going out in the back 40 and popping rounds off. You're going to go to a designated facility. So how many other units need to get through there? Both military, combat units versus, just like your average admin guys that have to go shoot once or twice a year just so they can stay up to date on their quals. You're going to have all of that you have to compete with. We've all seen videos of retards on the range in uniform, mags backwards, or, oh, my gun's not working. Like, yeah, you're out of ammo, or holding it like an idiot. Just because you're in the military does not mean that you are this elite pedestal of military training. And a majority of the time, like we've stated plenty before, are there people who are badasses in the military? Absolutely there are. And there are people who have different units and different skill sets that get all that extra funding and that extra time to train. I'm not diminishing that, and I'm not diminishing anyone else that joined the military. What I am saying is, to kind of argue against, Lucas Bakken a little bit here, is that yes, you have to spend the time to build those skill sets. But if I were to take the bit of knowledge I learned doing CQB in the military and then take one of the course information things that he's talking about, download it, read the materials, watch the instructional videos, things like that, and then get my buddies like we normally do and go shooting once a week and spend an hour and a half to 2 hours of the time we go shoot to begin to learn those skills at least once a day, every day for, a couple months. That's a lot better threshold than where we were at before. If, for example, if I'm the only one with any kind of like actual CQB experience, taking the little bit that I know, plus the bit that the information is given, and walking everybody through that, I'm not saying we're not going to compete with, Navy SEALs or nothing, but you do it long enough and you do it with the same people, you're going to develop that skill set to the point to where, like, okay, compared to your average infantryman, we might be fairly comparable. And, we might not be up to par 100% with them, but we're still way ahead of the rest of the civilian population. Because that's the thing, is like, even if you took just the recommendation that he's talking about, and you went in, downloaded all the information, and just like picked 2 or 3 days out of the month just to go kind of clear your basement, things like that, you're already doing way more than a majority of gun owners in the United States. Majority of gun owners in the United States go out, buy a gun, buy 50 rounds of ammunition, and it sits in the back of their safe until them and the boys want to go shoot a few rounds at pop cans. No one's training. No one's doing kit stuff. I think a lot of times we get super worried ourselves too about, like, oh, I don't have this piece of kit, or oh, I don't have this, or oh, I don't have that, I'm going to die. And we just assume that everyone is just as prepared or motivated as we are, when in reality, any of those of you guys listening to this podcast that take any of our advice to heart and do any of the things that we say, you're probably in the top 2 to 3% of gun owners as far as people who actually train and do stuff. That's just my opinion. I mean, like, a majority of people they don't train, they don't train effectively, they don't do small unit tactics, they don't do medical, they don't do comms, they go out and shoot for fun or hype beast stuff on Instagram. So again, kind of going back to what Lucas was saying, he was basically making the point that unless you were willing to develop and spend the massive amounts of time to learn these skills, that even people just giving you the free information, you wouldn't be able to do anything with it. And I think part of it might be just him trying to be like, hey, I'm running a business and I'm not just going to give stuff away for free, and defending that decision. I understand that. But I think that to make the claim that you won't ever be as good as just like your standard military, individual, I think is bullshit. Just plain and simple. I think that most of us would agree, with obvious exceptions. And I'm speaking broadly in terms of the whole military, not specific units, not special operations, not super salty infantrymen. I'm talking about a majority of the military, both not combat and non-combat MOSs. Your average civilian is better kitted, better equipped, and in my opinion, better motivated than your average military member. Even going to the range, I think it's very apparent. I am a huge fan of the range. When it comes to the military, however, because of all of the stupid regulations that have to come into running a successful range, they take something I enjoy and they make it retarded. And so I don't even want to be there half the time. And I'm getting to shoot ammo that I'm not paying for, but it's like, it's so dumbed down, and it's so watered down, and so many things are done in the name of, quote unquote safety, that it kind of takes all of the training value out of it and makes it incredibly unrealistic. And so that's your average, like, military training experience for a majority of people in the military. So then when you take people who are spending their own money, their own time, their own dedication to go out and learn these skills, to take them to heart, they're motivated, they're taking their time away from their families to go out with you and the boys into the woods and go do patrols, go do ruck marches, go dig a trench, go do whatever skill it is that you're trying to learn. When they're doing that by themselves, and they're doing that out of their own time and their own will, I think that it's definitely easier to become proficient in skills like that. I mean, there are plenty of groups that I have trained with over time that were way better trained as far as their actual ability to perform tasks than people I served with. And that's both reserves and active duty. So it gets to the certain point where you're like, man, what is, if it came down to this, like, I don't really think it's that much of competition. Like, yes, the big advantage I think the majority of the military has, because you have to remember, like, the military is playing to the lowest common denominator, right? They have to train to the dumbest person on your team and get them up to par. But the biggest thing that separates your average civilian from the military is just, I think, the massive industry behind it, the gear that they're getting for free, and the ability to have all kinds of assets on hand. I can't call in an IR drone or an airstrike or artillery or anything like that. And that does provide you a lot of capability. I mean, like, you could be a retard with an iPad and call in an airstrike, right? And that vastly makes you superior in your capability to what I'm able to do. However, if we're talking straight up one-on-one, your fire team, my fire team, your fire team is practicing a strict doctrine that has been put out by certain instructors that you are learning from, and mine is being adapted. Mine has the flexibility to adapt, the flexibility to change certain things, and the majority of the military doesn't have the capability necessarily during training to do a bunch of stuff on the fly. Some of them do, right? I'm not diminishing that, but I'm saying, like, from my experience, a lot of it is, this is the way the book says it, this is the way the training thing is. Oh, we got to check this box. Oh, we got to get through this evaluation. We got to get through this inspection. Whatever it is, there's so much of that going on that your time to actually spend doing quality training of stuff that makes sense is so limited that when you take someone then who's going out even at, let's say 4 hours a week, one day for 4 hours, for 4 weeks, they're doing it every week. That person's getting a better training value out of it because they're also taking it seriously. They're going out with people who want to be there. They're not doing it like, oh man, we got to meet at 04 to go pull rifles so we can go, F off at the range today, and I don't want to be here. Like, you're going out there like, yeah, man, I want to do this. Let's go. And you're getting hyped, you're getting pumped, you're getting motivated, and you're ready to learn. And as long as you've got quality materials to base it off of and instruct in some kind of instructional material to go off of, or preferably someone who has a little bit of knowledge, and you're not just pissing in the wind, you could get a very high training value out of it. And I've felt way more fulfilled with the training capabilities. I mean, with the capability of the training that I've experienced in the civilian side of things than I've ever had doing anything in the military. And that's just my experience. But I'll get off my soapbox with that. I just felt like that was, I didn't agree with the take that he had, and I wanted to put it out. Nothing against him. It's just I just disagree with his opinion, and had to put my 2 cents out there. But speaking of something a little bit more topical, I'm sure as we're all aware, Maui is basically a living hell right now, and it's massive fires going on. And it kind of got me to thinking, between that and some of the wildfires that have been happening in my area, and it being fire season in the part of the country where I'm at. And also, if you're in a part of the country that doesn't know what fire season is, please consider yourself lucky. So it got me thinking about this, and I was like, we talk about medical skills, we talk about the ability to get clean water, to scavenge food, to grow your food, to homestead and survive. But one thing we never really talk about a lot, I think, which I think would become very important in a grid down, Minuteman type scenario, we never really talk about firefighting. Now, I'm not a firefighter and I'm not an expert, but just some of the things that were kind of rolling around in my head the other day was, I was like, hopefully all of us have at least a fire extinguisher in the house. And, some of us maybe even in the cars. But my whole thing I was thinking about was like, if it does become a grid down scenario, if it does become something to where like Minutemen are required, the rule of law is broken down, do we have the modern day equivalent of the bucket brigade? Can you form that? Does anyone know what the hell they're doing? Like, if the house next to you caught fire and you don't have power and emergency services coming out to help you, do you know what to do to prevent your house from burning and to try to help your neighbors as much as you can? Or what if there's, you live in a small town, I live in a small town. We've got fields all around us and mountains around us. What happens if there's a wildfire, like a naturally occurring wildfire or something that happens and it's spreading towards town? Do you know how to go out and do a backburn, or how to clear the brush, or how to dig fire trenches, like things like this, to where I think those are important skills that I think we should, start to diversify into. And for me, like, I kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole, and I really want to try to get into some of the volunteer firefighter classes around me to kind of learn a little bit more about what I can do. And I've got some family that are firefighters I want to talk to a little bit more about this. But it was just something that kind of came across my mind where I was like, and I'm curious to see what you guys think. And for those of you who do respond on Instagram to us, I would like to hear from some of you guys, especially if there's any of you guys listening that are firefighters, about what your thoughts are on learning certain firefighting skills in a grid down scenario, but also like what should we focus on? Like what should we learn? Should we look more at like wildland firefighting? Because that's kind of where my mind goes. And what could we do if water's not readily available to put out a fire or something? If it's something where it's like all I have is my drinking water that I'm filtering, I can't just go throw buckets and buckets on somebody's neighbor down the street. Like what ways do we have to prevent something or to stop something or to help help our neighbors in need when there's fire going on? I think that would be something that would be interesting to see. I'd really like, if there's any firefighters listening to this, you guys reach out, kind of give me a direction in which we could go, and we'll talk about it later on the podcast, because that is something I was thinking about as an additional skill to learn. We talk about, like I said, we talk about scavenging and like how to build shelters and how to start fire, how to do all this stuff. I've never really delved into like, hey, how do you stop a wildfire without, qualified professionals? How do you just get your community together to make sure the fire goes around your community and not through it? So I think that would be something like important to look into, and something important to kind of understand, at least like the basics and the concepts of. And again, tying this kind of back to the CQB thing, for me, it's more important to like get the information and understand the basics and the concepts of these things. And that, again, tying this kind of back in with the CQB thing, I'm interested in this firefighting thing. It's a skill I think I could learn. Will I ever be as skilled as a 20-year, wildland firefighter, or the hell jumpers or fire jumpers or whatever, whatever those guys are called that like do the super, parachute in and do the wildland firefighting. I'm probably screwing that name up. I don't remember what they are, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Or hot shots, that's what they are. But I'm never going to be as skilled as those guys, and I'm not going to be as skilled as someone who went to a fire academy. But does that mean that I shouldn't learn? Does that mean that I can't be capable of that? Or does that mean that, without, like, yeah, I might not get there in like 8 weeks doing a training course, but if I practiced firefighting skills on the side, or then like in my own time on the weekends, going to certain classes and courses, that it might take me longer, but like, does that mean, that over the course of a year or two, that I wouldn't be able to learn successfully how to do certain things? And that's kind of where I'm going with this whole, CQB type thing that, Luke Spockman brought up earlier, kind of going back to that, is that I think, it's all about learning the concepts and the skills on how to build from them, and having the critical thinking to see how they apply to you and figure that out, so going back to the firefighting thing, I think, I think it would be important to learn how to do that, and important to be like, okay, obviously making sure that if it does come down to that kind of situation and, fire season is coming, making sure that you have all your stuff packed up and ready to go, and at a moment's notice, because that could be something that you are facing. And, it just really sucks, like watching the stuff in Hawaii too, because your heart kind of goes out to these people, man, because they're losing everything. And it's like, where are you going to run? You're surrounded by ocean. Eventually you just got to run into the water, and you've seen videos of people doing that, and it's pretty gnarly. And it just really got me thinking about, man, if this is happening over there and all of this, and they have fire departments, they have firefighters, what happens if it's a grid down scenario and there's not? And it doesn't have to be arson or something crazy to start a fire. Fires start naturally all the time. Dry brush, hit by lightning, something like that. Some dude throws a cigarette out alongside the highway in the wrong spot. And if you're somewhere that, even if you have a small fire department or a rural area, and it's something to where emergency services just ain't doing it right now, and fire kicks off like that, if you don't know what you're doing, like that's going to ruin your day. So I think it's important to kind of start to think about that and learn those skills. And I haven't really heard a bunch of people talk about it before, which kind of, got me thinking about that. Is like, we all think about the sexy stuff, the running and gunning, the shooting, scooting, the medical side of things, what radio you've got. But I never really hear people talk about like, hey, if in the middle of your firefight that you're using to defend your community, someone throws a Molotov cocktail and catches one of the buildings on fire, how do you keep that from burning down your town? It's like that. That's just kind of like a wild scenario, but it's like, how do you prevent these things from happening? So I think it's something that's interesting to think about, something that's interesting to, is a good thought experiment. I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper into it, and hopefully when Mike's back next week, we'll kind of touch a little bit more on it. But it's something I've started to look at, and I encourage you guys to look into as well. And I'm curious to see what you guys have to say about it. With that being said, too, this one's a little bit shorter as I'm by myself. Not as much banter, unfortunately. But moving forward, some of the things to expect. Me and Mike have been talking, and we are super interested in getting some better microphones, so we're going to have some better audio quality. I really appreciate all you guys who have been listening and how fast we've been growing. We're literally doing this with Xbox headsets plugged into our cell phones. We really want to give you guys a better experience. We really want to get into eventually doing video. It's just been a matter of getting the equipment, being tight on cash, getting the money up together to get the stuff that we need, researching what it is that we need. But things to look forward to is we will eventually be stepping up the audio quality. We have meddled with doing video a little bit in the past, and we're kind of working the kinks out of that, but we definitely want to get to video so we can offer this to you guys not only on here, but on YouTube and on all over the platforms. Start being able to do some clips and some reels and kind of, snippets here and there. So that if you got someone who's interested in the show, you can just kind of send them that, something like that. So it's something that we're definitely looking forward on doing. Also, if you haven't already, go to the Mid-Tier Thoughts page. We have our own Instagram page. It'll be in the description. It's at mid-tier_thoughts_podcast at Instagram. I think we have a Twitter under the same name. I've messed around with that a little bit. I'm not a big Twitter guy. I mostly do most of my stuff on Instagram. So if you're trying to find us, I just recommend going to the Instagram side of things. But yeah, we do want to improve. We do want to make it better for you guys. We are looking to getting some of our European listeners on here soon and kind of give their perspective of how the Second Amendment, their thoughts on the Second Amendment, kind of what they think about it, their thoughts on the gun community as a whole, how it looks in their country, and just kind of give you guys a different perspective outside of the U.S. I know we have a ton of listeners that aren't in the United States, and I greatly appreciate you guys. But I am curious to see if anyone on here is a listener from Australia. I would love if you would contact me too. I would be very interested, since there's 7% of our listener base is Australian. I'd be very interested to hear from you guys, kind of what draws you into the podcast. To my understanding, your guys' gun culture is almost non-existent. I could be entirely wrong, and I would like to learn more about it from you guys. So if someone could reach out and just kind of explain to me like what it is that you find interesting about this, what it is that, keeps you coming back, and what the gun culture is like in Australia, what the mentality of people is like in Australia. Is it split like in the U.S. between conservative, liberal? Is it way one side or the other? How does the Minuteman type of, community interact? How does it play out over there? So that same also goes to any one of our listeners on the foreign audience, in the foreign and international audience. For you guys listening, we greatly appreciate you. We appreciate our American listeners as well. But yeah, feel free to reach out on our social medias. I'm always glad to talk to people. You can, if any of you guys are in contact, are in contact with us, we're quick to respond. I know some of my listeners on here, you guys know that I'll answer in a heartbeat. I love talking to you guys. Please reach out, interact. It really helps us out, helps us kind of also figure out sometimes what we want to talk about and give us some new perspectives on things. So yeah, thanks for listening, guys. This has been another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. I know I kind of rambled a little bit on this one. We had a little bit of a scheduling conflict, so me and Mike will be back at it next week. We're going to bring you some good stuff. And thanks for listening.